Have you been unleashed?
Unleashed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Horizon Advisors Unleashed podcast. This is Andrew Henricks, your host again, back at it with another exciting podcast today. It's going to be a good one. I am joined here with a friend of mine, Liz Casselman. Liz, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For everyone out there that doesn't know Liz, a quick intro. Liz is a couple different things. One, she's a real estate attorney. Two, she is the owner of her own business, of a title agency, so she is an entrepreneur, business owner. And she's also a qualified intermediary and has a specialty in certain real estate transactions with law, such as 1031 exchanges, which we will talk about in a second. But again, thank you, Liz, for joining us. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I don't know if you're a football fan by any means. The Super Bowl was last night. Did you watch it?
I did, grudgingly, because the Lions weren't in it. So.
Yes, there's a little bit of a salty taste for sure. I think everyone in Metro Detroit, at least, who likes football. I personally didn't really want to see the Chiefs win again, but they seem to figure out a way. The only, I guess, positive thing we can take is I do know that our Lions did beat the Super Bowl champions. It's kind of like a fake trophy, but indirectly, right?
Right, and we got the draft to look forward to in Detroit, so I'm excited for that.
It's going to be exciting, for sure. But concluding the NFL and football season for the year, we'll see everything back next fall. And hopefully we have another good one, because I think there's some hope here in Metro Detroit to maybe go on a little bit of a run. So we'll see. Enough of that, which we didn't come here to talk about football. I think we've heard enough of that for the year. Want to talk a little bit about you, Liz. Again, like I mentioned before, some unique expertise in some of these areas, maybe specifically real estate that we've mentioned. But I wanted to take one step back, because something I didn't mention is you're also an author, right? You wrote a book. Does have something to do with some of the things I did just mention, but I kind of wanted to start there and talk about your book a bit and how it relates to what you do and the business that you run. For everyone listening, Liz did publish a book in 2023, and it was titled Not Just a Title, A Journey of Growth in the Title Industry. So, Liz, why don't you start with, why don't you share a little bit about why you wanted to write a book, how it came due, and maybe what the book is about?
Sure. So writing this book was a really exciting experience that was not in my 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. It was just an opportunity that came up because Streamline Publishing, one of the co-founders, his name's Alex, is a good friend of mine, and he reached out to me to say, I like your posts on LinkedIn. I'm looking to see if you are maybe interested in having us write your story. And it was just a lot of things lining up at the right time, and Streamline Publishing has a great program where it really literally streamlines the process. So it was a 16-week program to write a book, and that works really well within my schedule. So I really wanted to share a little bit about my experience starting a title industry. I was, when I started the agency, one of the younger title agency owners that I've ever met. Now I'm getting a little older, so I can't claim that spot anymore.
We'll claim it as long as we can, right?
Right. So the book is a lot about my experiences starting that title industry, or title insurance agency, excuse me. I started it while I was in law school. My dad and my brother are both real estate attorneys, and I was clerking at their practice, and they were trying to figure out where I could fit in and what specialization I could be a part of. And the title agency really went well with the real estate.
Sure.
Yeah. So that was my job. And once I graduated from law school and passed the bar, I was full-time working for the title agency, and it was just me and my title examiner. That was in 2015. And now in 2024, we have 13 employees.
Awesome.
We purchased a second title agency, American Title Agency of Lenawee, and that one is in Adrian, Michigan, so close to the Ohio border. And the book is just really exploring some of the things that I've learned along the way about being an empathetic leader, about sharing my story, and trying to battle imposter syndrome.
Sure. Definitely a lot of good things touched on there. Entrepreneur being one of them, right? I guess before we elaborate a little bit deeper on some of those experiences and the things that you went through that you just mentioned, why don't, from your own words, why don't, for people maybe that don't know, if they don't, what a title agency does, right? What do you do on a day-to-day basis in your role as the owner of a title agency?
Sure. Title insurance is a little more known than 1031 exchanges,
Yes,
but not
yes,
much.
just a
bit. Anytime there's a sale of a piece of real estate or financing, so if you're refinancing or getting a loan that's securing real estate, you're going to want title insurance. And unlike your casualty insurance, this isn't something that renews every year. It's not a risk mitigation product. What title insurance does is it researches the history of the land, right? Who's owned the land, any mortgages, liens, unpaid taxes, and it makes sure that all of the risks on that property are completely eliminated at the time that either that loan is secured or the title is transferred to the new owner. It's an insurance policy that's paid for once and lasts the entire life of the loan or the entire time that that property owner owns that property.
Yeah, it's great. Obviously, great description. I couldn't have said it any better. But you can look at, you can find out if and are there skeletons buried, right, on the land and figure out if there'd be an issue and whatnot and protect people from that if there is. So, I mean, dealing with all these different types of transactions, right? So every time, like you said, right, there's a title transaction, you can be involved in some capacity. What are, I'm assuming the most typical type of transactions that you're dealing with are more properties in terms of buildings, right? Are you talking, or more raw land type of transactions?
So it's regional, right? Here in Metro Detroit, Birmingham Title Agency does a lot of commercial.
Sure.
We are primarily commercial. We do residential as well. And so these are actual commercial buildings or residential homes. We do a couple vacant land closings a month. And then at the American Title Agency, it's a much more rural area. So we're doing a ton of agriculture there, a lot more vacant land,
Sure.
Those types of transactions. So it really just depends on kind of what
Where
the
you're
land
at.
looks like. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, definitely a lot of different land everywhere, Michigan being one included. I'll go back to the book then for a second, right? So you kind of just got a description of what the business does, what you do on a daily basis. How do you get involved? How do you start in that industry, right? How did you do that to generate business ultimately in this space?
So, all credit due to that law firm that
Sure.
I'm now a partner of, because you have to get clients somewhere. And we were in a good place that we had our real estate legal clients that were going to need a title agency. So we kind of stepped into that role as ourselves. In terms of qualifications, the state of Michigan is actually very lenient for entry into the title insurance industry. There's no degree requirement. There's no level of education. There is a licensing requirement, and it's just a test through the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. And there's no continuing education. There's no renewal fees.
That'd be
Once you get
nice,
that
wouldn't
license, you're good to go. So it is not as regulated as the other areas of
Sure.
insurance, I will say. But being a licensed attorney definitely gives me and the rest of our agency a leg up in terms of what types of transactions we can do and those skeletons that we find, how we kind of get rid of them
Sure.
in a way that's best for our clients.
No, that's great. And again, I think you put it you phrased it the right way. When you talk about complementing, right? I mean, speaking on entrepreneurial type side or a business side, right? You found an area that you felt that you could help improve clientele on the law practice because they were going to need that service, whether it was you or somebody else, right? So, looking at that as an opportunity to also not only help your clients, but maybe better serve them, right? If you provide good service, have a good relationship with them on the law side, and then you can help them furthermore with, additional capacity, I think is a good thing when you're looking at business entirely, which is kind of what I wanted to conclude on for the book, right? At the end of the day, disregard the type of business that you're in. You're still a business owner. You mentioned being an emphatic leader, imposter syndrome, right? Some of these things that as a business owner starting out, whether you're younger or older or just starting in a business, or maybe you were a business owner before, but you sold a business and then you went off and did a new business entirely, right? You can still feel some of those themes or characteristics that Liz mentioned. So just to kind of conclude on the book, I guess, how did you navigate some of those complexities of being a business owner and, ultimately come up on the other side?
That's a big question.
I typically like to do that.
I would say that the biggest thing that helped me navigate was once I started to share my experiences with the rest of the industry. It's very easy when you're starting your own business to be so laser focused on, your own P&L sheet and what's happening today and how many orders do I have. And when you get that ability to kind of pick your head up and look around and speak to people who have been in the same shoes as you, get mentors and just learn from them, it really puts everything into perspective. You're not the first person going through this, and you won't be the last.
Yeah, I think that's another great point. You mentioned you had 16 employees, I think, or 13 employees.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you started in the beginning with 0 or a couple maybe. What has been, I guess what have you learned along the process of recruiting and be able to retain good employees, right? I mean, one of the things that has been a big talking point maybe over the last 4 or 5 years now with everything that has happened worldwide and maybe some of the change to the landscape of working. Have you dealt with any challenges of, recruiting and retaining employees, or have you had maybe anything that you could share that you have learned along the way that has helped improve that in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I touch on this actually a lot in the book because that was one of the biggest struggles. And I've been an employee and I've had a large range of different types of bosses. So learning what I wanted as an employee and making sure that I mirrored that as an employer was really important to me. So having those conversations with your employees, they know that they're not going to be the ones making those big decisions, but when you include them in the conversation,
Sure,
it really helps. And so a lot of changes that we've had to face due to COVID, due to staffing, due to everything, technology, it's just having a conversation. Hey guys, we have to do this. This is why it's costing us too much money. What are your ideas? What have you seen out there? And I have solved a lot of my own solutions within the company just by talking to my employees. So one recent example is a receptionist. So manage your expectations. Your receptionist is not going to give you a lifelong pledge of allegiance and stay with you for 30, 40 years. And so what does that look like for a position that's going to have higher turnover than some of your other more senior positions?
Sure.
And one of my employees mentioned that at an agency she worked at, you dialed the phone and it immediately went to a phone tree. And we had to evaluate as business owners, are we losing something by not having that person answer the phone, or are we creating an efficiency? And so those are the types of things that I learn every day from my staff.
Yeah, I think that, again, is a perfect example of navigating, again, different expectations, right? Fair expectations. Communication, at the end of the day, we've talked about that on this podcast all the time in different areas of personal, financial, business, whatever it is. We're not here giving relationship advice, but communication obviously is a big piece of it. And I think just like you mentioned, I think if you hear, obviously experience from the side, right? You mentioned you being an employee, you have that experience too, things that you like, didn't like. That's a good thing, taking that experience. But then also communicating with, again, I think that expectation, establishing that both from the business owner's point of view, what they expect, and then also understanding what the employee expects. At the end of the day, having that conversation might end up being a very positive thing when you're talking about all these different turnover, employee issues, things of that nature. So I appreciate shedding some light on that. I know that's been a big topic with a lot of business owners that we speak with, again, ranging in a lot of different areas of business, but employees and retaining them and understanding what they want sometimes can be challenging. And when you start as a business, right, you might not have all of that experience right under the belt, and you have to kind of learn along your way, which again, I'm sure you allude to a little bit in the book. So I'm going to switch gears, but if anybody, listening, interested, definitely not just a title, A Journey of Growth in the Title Industry by Liz Casselman. Check it out. I'm sure there's some great, especially for entrepreneurs or someone starting a business, I'm sure there's a lot in there you could learn disregarding the type of business. So thank you for that again, Liz. Let's go to maybe a little bit more niche area that I know I'm excited about. I brought my CFP study book with me today to try to sound all fancy, but I'm not the expert by any means on this. So it's really just here as a crutch for me to look and see if I can get some interesting questions for you. But what I'm talking about is 1031 exchanges. So I'm going to give my little brief explanation of what a 1031 exchange is, but I'm going to pass it over to you because you do have a designation, certified exchange specialist through the Federation of Exchange Accommodators, where, again, you have kind of this niche area of expertise in 1031 exchanges. So what I think a 1031 exchange is to do with transitioning or transferring, whichever way you want to look at it, real estate specifically, and deferring gain or taxation on that transaction, right? The way that I always look at it in our industry is we're very familiar with 1035, which I might even say 1035 when I mean 1031. In the insurance industry, which is, again, a non-taxable or a deferring of the taxation transfer of insurance policies, annuities, etc. So I'll stop talking, and I'm going to ask you what, if you don't mind, from a broad aspect, explain what a 1031 exchange is, how you use them, and why they're advantageous for clients or people that you work with.
Sure. I mean, you definitely got it.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good on some of it. Okay. Thank you.
So basically, Section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code, that's where 1031 exchange comes from, is a incentive program from the IRS for investors. And after January 1st, 2018, the only sort of long-term assets that can be exchanged are real estate. But prior to that, it applied to personal assets. It could be equipment in the sale of a business. It could be a plane, a car, a truck. But right now, it is just limited to real estate. And what the IRS wants you to do is keep your money in the same sort of asset. So when you go to sell a long-term asset, like a piece of real estate, and you are going to receive proceeds and pay capital gains on that, instead, you can reinvest those proceeds in a like-kind long-term asset and defer those capital gains taxes. And this is huge. Capital gains taxes are one of those things that the average consumer doesn't think that much about because there's a big exception for personal residences. And that's the real estate that most people are buying and selling on a regular basis. So they're not really paying too much attention to capital gains. But there are a lot of new investors entering into the real estate market, especially here in Michigan. People who haven't been doing it for 20, 30 years don't have 20, 30 property portfolios and are just starting to buy maybe one or two residential homes that they're going to rent out. So this is really where 1031 education, I think, is super important from all of the professionals in our industry, from financial advisors to tax attorneys to real estate attorneys, real estate brokers. Everybody could benefit from learning more about this and being able to advise their clients, hey, I think you can save tens of thousands of dollars on your capital gains by figuring out what you want to do with that money when you sell your property.
Yeah, and I will say, in all honesty, I think rentals and the idea of a rental is probably one of the most talked about subjects in a client meeting. Besides, of course, these very specific things we're talking about, maybe it's investments or financial planning, but from a concept perspective, I probably get, we're thinking about a rental, or we think about buying real estate, or turning our primary residence into a rental, right? Those sort of conversations. It happens very, very frequently. It's a very intriguing and enticing idea for most people. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of people maybe getting into that space now that don't not have the experience of, maybe they're getting into it and they're brand new with real estate and they don't understand some of these concepts. So I do completely agree with you from an education standpoint. It's a very advantageous strategy if you're in that space, which we'll allude to in a second. I did want to go back to one thing you mentioned, because I do know, again, it used to be for different assets you could do this for. Some law, I believe in 2017, is what changed that to just specifically real estate. But you mentioned the word like-kind. What do you mean by like-kind? What is a like-kind asset? What would qualify in the real estate sector that we're talking about here to be able to do this?
So the good news is all real estate is like-kind.
There you go.
As long as you're within the United States, whether it's a vacant land or a residential house or a commercial building or a farm, real estate is real estate is real estate. So the like-kind requirement is super easy to meet through a 1031 exchange. You just have to stay within the country and buy a piece of property that's going to be held for investment.
Nice. Well, that makes it a little bit easier, I guess, right? Because there's definitely a lot of different real estate out there in terms of what it's classified. We've alluded to a couple already, throughout this podcast. And one other thing you mentioned, again, most people, I think that was a great point. Most people might not think about this necessarily, right? The capital gain exposure of the real estate, because most of the time they're dealing with, like you said, the sale of a residential residence, which they might have, single, the 250 exclusion, or married filing joint. Again, community property, that gets into all that conversation. But essentially, you get a pretty nice exemption, right, from capital gains on a sale of a primary residence, assuming you've lived there hit certain criteria. I know there's specifics. But many people think of that and then don't think, again, if they have a rental or they turn their primary residence into a rental, that now you are exposing yourself down the road. If you want to sell or do other things, there might be now different consequences, tax purposes. Nobody likes to pay taxes, I don't think. I know we have to do it and we believe in it, but no one really truly likes to do it. So utilizing some of these strategies could certainly be beneficial for people who have rental portfolios, to say the least. Your designation that you received, I know, is pretty unique. I think you mentioned that there's only potentially a couple maybe in Michigan that have it. Why don't you elaborate that on a bit? I know it's a specialty in 1031 exchanges, but from your own words, what does that designation do or provide for you?
Right. So I know we talked earlier about title agencies and how loose basically the restrictions are. There isn't a high barrier to entry. So if you can imagine, it's even lower barrier of entry to be a qualified intermediary. And that role in the 1031 process, if I can just explain a little,
sure, definitely,
is to facilitate the transaction. So what this means is to draft the documents with the title agency, right, to paper the transaction as your intention when you sold your property was to enter into a 1031 exchange. And this is very important for when your CPA files this. Now, the qualified intermediary's secondary role is to hold those sale proceeds for the duration of your exchange. Now, this is a lot of money, right? They're holding on to a ton of money. And if we can all remember fondly, back in 2008, Land America, Countrywide, a lot of the problems came from misuse of 1031 funds. All this background to say that there is a large and well-deserved distrust of qualified intermediaries.
Sure.
Okay? So in order to establish yourself as you know what you're doing and you can responsibly manage millions of dollars and you're not going to try to invest them somewhere and do something with it, it's important to have those types of designations and to look for associations that provide some sort of licensing or certification to show I've done my work to stand out in this industry, to say, I know what I'm talking about. And all of it is to just give peace of mind to our clients.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely relate to that. In a lot of industries, unfortunately, there's always, a bad egg or a rotten egg that might, unfortunately, cause a stigma, right? That there's a lot of distrust in a certain area of dealing with maybe money or some of these, transactions. We have a lot of designations, of course, in our industry to help with that too. So totally get it. I guess maybe just for the listeners, we've been talking about 1031 exchanges, what they are, right? And thank you again for your elaborate description on that, because that's way better than mine. But why don't, if you don't mind, again, I know there's a lot of examples that you could, so many, it's infinite. But maybe just like a basic example of a 1031 exchange from the actual what they're doing perspective, and laying it out that way would be, pretty cool to hear from you and some of the ones you've dealt with, or again, hypothetically, conceptually. If you could share an example, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So there's a couple different types of structures of 1031s, and I don't know how complicated we want to get into them, but I'll touch on like the three biggest ones.
Sure.
The first
that'd be
one
great.
is like a standard, also called simultaneous or delayed 1031 exchange. And what this looks like in all practicality is the tax exchanger has a property that they're ready to sell.
Okay.
They're under purchase agreement. They're getting ready to sell. And at some point it enters, their mind, or someone tells them, hey, have you thought about a 1031 exchange? All that does is trigger a communication between the title agency who's already handling the sale transaction to communicate with the qualified intermediary that the exchanger hires, basically. The There's a couple changes to the closing documents, a couple more forms entered in. And the biggest thing is that the money isn't going to the tax exchanger, the person selling the property. Instead, it goes to this qualified intermediary. There are two big deadlines to keep in mind. You have 45 days from the day that you sell to identify any properties that you might want to buy, called replacement properties. And you have 180 days to actually close on it. So we're looking at a 6-month time frame from between when you're selling and when you're buying. You can buy multiple properties. You can sell multiple properties and roll them into one 1031 exchange. So
Interesting.
the properties have to be like kind. The properties have to be held for investments. This can't be your primary residence or vacation home. And you have to meet those deadlines. And then the last requirement is it has to be the same taxpayer. So taxpayer is kind of a tricky thing to think about, right? Who actually owns the property? If it's an LLC that has 2 members, that LLC has a federal ID number. That's the taxpayer. If it's a sole member LLC, however, that individual is probably using their social security number instead of the federal ID number. Then it becomes a disregarded entity, and they have a little more freedom of how to structure who owns that replacement property. So those are kind of, the basic structure.
Big ones. Sure. And again, just for simplicity's sake, again, when this is most advantageous would be if you have, let's say you bought a property 20 years ago for $200,000, whatever it is, maybe it's paid off, it's doing well, it's a rental, whatever it is. And now that same property today is worth $1 million, let's say, right? So you have $800,000 from your cost basis of the 200. Now its fair market value is $1 million. You could sell it, right? But you would have the gain, right, on that. But instead, if you did something like you just mentioned and you decided to maybe diversify portfolio of rentals, or you moved it to a different piece of property, you were going to buy some land or whatever it is, if you did it, of course, accurately and efficiently and followed the rules you just described, that you could continue to defer, right, that $800,000 of gain. That'd be kind of another good way to put it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, again, for a lot of people out there, that could be extremely advantageous. And some of those rules that you just mentioned are what make it complicated, right? Because you could be having an idea in your head, but it might not even make sense given some of the rules you just meant, taxpayer, or hopefully it is a like kind. If you're considering land to land, things like that, probably falls under that category. But it's certainly complicated. And I can tell you one thing is that without at least bringing up the idea, it might get overlooked. Unless it's someone who obviously has experience and has done it before, then they'll think about it. But even with other investment properties and things like that, people might not even be considering it. They might just be considering selling it. And that's the only alternative, whereas this could be a very strong one. So thank you for your specialty on that, of course, and shining some light on it. I love to go through these kind of things because we're planners. We like to do this stuff. Some people don't like to do it. So laying it out easy for them to understand, usually that's a better result from what we see. So again, we appreciate that. I'll kind of conclude, I guess, today just talking about I guess how you integrate, some of the things you just mentioned, right? 1031 exchanges, things that you do, some designations, some of your specialties with your the family law practice that you are a partner of. What would you say for people, I guess, that you deal with on a normal basis that maybe have these different portfolios or they have different assets? I mean, to get their ducks in a row, right? To maybe they're considering something like this. They have a bunch of rentals and now they're like, I don't know what to do. What would be kind of like maybe a little checklist or to help them get those ducks in a row to maybe start exploring something like this?
Right. So the biggest thing I always tell clients is to consider every commercial transaction that they're doing as a potential 1031 exchange, because there's no penalty to entering into one. And then if you don't find a replacement property, you're at the same spot you're at. You have to pay capital gains.
Yep.
And so the biggest thing is, what are you doing with those proceeds? What's your plan? And how are you trying to build wealth for yourself and potentially for your next generation? Because the coolest part of the 1031 exchange is often referred to as the swap till you drop.
Yep. Swap till you drop.
But if you keep rolling,
that's a good one. I like that.
All the way until you pass away,
sure,
your heirs don't have to pay those capital gains taxes. So it goes from deferred to eliminated, and that's that's a pretty big gift to leave to the next generation.
Sure.
So thinking about your assets, thinking about what you want that kind of property management to look like. I had a client who recently sold off 26 residential properties that were all, rentals to buy a $4 million hotel. That's a very different type of property management.
Definitely.
So it's kind of thinking like maybe I'm looking for something different,
Yeah.
or maybe I want something more consolidated, or maybe I want to bring partners in and get a larger asset. These are all things to start thinking about now, whether you're ready to sell or not, because what's happening is people are coming in and making crazy good offers to purchase your property, even though it's not for sale. So if you're not thinking about these things now, it could come up and you miss out on a really great opportunity to defer a lot of taxes.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. I mean, consolidation, definitely would be a topic in order for the hotel one you mentioned. Definitely different, completely different idea or strategy maybe per se, but going from 26 properties to one, things like that, and consolidating. One thing you mentioned, which, again, I agree with, and we talk about all the time, both on this podcast and also in our daily, conversations with clients, is to ask them exactly truly what you want to have happen, right? There are a lot of alternatives always when you're discussing these types of deals or what you want to do with money and taxes and investing and et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it really depends on what you want, right? This might not be a solution if, you have a lot of gain in the property. Yeah, would it make total sense to continue to, roll that tax, defer into another property and do a 1031? Sure, but if you wanted to not deal with it anymore, or you wanted to go buy a second home, or something that maybe not qualifies, then it's not an option. But at least you explored that alternative, because you can look and say, okay, well, if you really wanted to cash it out and sell and go do something with it and travel the world, here's what that's going to look like. Or maybe you keep the rentals, you do a 1031 exchange, and you get you get two properties, and now you have passive income from both of them, and maybe that's what pays for your vacations, right? So there's always all these different alternatives, and sometimes people get very focused on, well, what are other people doing, or what does it say I should do? Well, we can somehow get to that answer normally, but at the end of the day, it depends on what you want. And doing this type of exchange would still mean you are continuing to be involved in real estate, right? Which can be very advantageous, as we just described. But again, it always depends on what you want to have happen. So again, I can definitely appreciate that and agree with finding out what exactly they want and need does have a lot to do with what you decide to do. I think 1031, I think we're good on that. Thank you again for explaining all of it. Again, a lot of great things we discussed today. And I would say, kind of in closing, for one last topic, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, us being included, for anybody out there who is starting a business or wanting to start a business and hasn't done it, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but would you have any piece of advice from your experience? Maybe it's something you mentioned in your book previously, but would you have any piece of advice for someone that it was going through exactly what you went through, right? And wanting to start a business and having to kind of start, from square one?
Yeah, biggest piece of advice is to ask for help. I mean, that's the
a good
biggest
one.
thing is I'm the type of person that's like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to figure it out, and I don't need to ask anybody. And while that's a great work ethic and it'll get you through a lot of the hurdles, if you are unwilling to learn from others, if you're intent on reinventing the wheel, it's going to slow down your progress. Not eliminate it. You're not going to not be successful. It's just going to take you longer, and it's going to be more work. And there's so many communities out there that are dedicated to helping brand new entrepreneurs skip ahead a lot of the hard steps to get into a better place.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Without help, I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'm certain you can probably say the same.
Yep, same.
Definitely wouldn't be sitting here today without that help. So I would agree. And, again, to kind of take it one step further is, asking for help, but then also believing and understanding that you need help, right? And I think by taking that step to ask, you've already maybe gone through that process. But, like Liz just mentioned, sometimes if you're the kind of person that is the go-getter and wants to do it, and you don't maybe always want to rely on somebody else because you're always the one who'll just power through and get it done. A lot of the time, you have capacity, scale, other things, issues that will eventually come due at some point. You can only do it all yourself for so long, right? So getting that help and finding people that are willing to help are always great things for business. I do know that we have a lot of people that are exploring or potentially a career change or maybe wanting to start a business and doing things. So I appreciate the insight there and the advice coming from someone who's been through it. But again, this has been great. Definitely a very interesting piece of the tax rules, real estate, right, legal aspect of all the things that people deal with is 1031 exchanges. Again, I would say in closing, if anybody is at all interested, you have someone right here that is very well versed and is very unique, especially in our state of Michigan. So you know how to find her. And again, I appreciate you popping on the podcast, Liz. It's been great. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your insight and your expertise. It's really appreciated. So thank you again, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.